Hello, welcome to the VEITS Group podcast on implementing the factory track solution with the SyteLine ERP system. With us today, we have Vishnu Raman, Senior Project Manager for VEITS Group. Thank you for joining us, Vishnu. Vishnu is going to give us a brief overview on factory track. To start out, can you give me an overview of what factory track is and what is involved with it?
Yep, that sounds good. Good morning, Kelly. Okay, so factory track is Infor recommended data collection solution. I know Infor had many data collection solutions, but now they've standardized on factory track. And in fact, they use factory track for a lot of their ERPs, like LN and M3 and other systems. So SyteLine is one of them. So SyteLine factory track is the data collection system for SyteLine. What that does for us is factory track has a couple of modules. It allows us to handle all the warehousing transactions. So it helps us to move material from location to location, do cycle counts, inventories, that sort of thing, receiving, shipping, as well as on the shop floor. You can use it on the shop floor to do all the labor reporting, material issues, material returns, project labor transactions, all sort of labor reporting. You could do that. And then there's a time tracking module within that also does the clock in, clock outs, payroll processing. So that's part of it. So it's a full-fledged data collection system which handles warehousing activities, shop floor activities, as well as the time tracking from mostly the shop floor users.
Great. Can you describe the three models of factory track and how they can be used?
Yeah, so the three modules within the factory track, one of them is warehouse mobility. Okay, so as I was mentioning, warehouse mobility handles all the warehousing transactions. So that could be as simple as moving material from location to location. So if you need to move material from location to location, all you have to do is, as long as you use barcodes, you can scan most of the information. Okay, so for example, if you were to move from location to location, you would scan the from location, you would scan the part number, then you'll walk over to the to location, scan that, and enter the quantity. So the only thing you would enter is in that case would be quantity, and then that'll do the transaction. And these are all real-time transactions, by the way. So that's simple move transaction. There's purchase order receiving. You can use it to receive purchase orders. So when you receive a purchase order, so let's say if you have a truck shipment show up at the dock, then you can use a handheld computer. All these run on handheld computers and tablets. So you can receive your purchase orders from the truck to your dock, and then from the dock, then you can put away to your stocking location. So it streamlines that too. And then on the picking, packing, and the shipping, you can use it to pick your products for an order and then package it and then ship it as well. And warehouse mobility also allows you to do cycle counts. If you use cycle counts, you can generate the counts, record the counts, do that activity in the factory track. Same thing with physical inventory. It can handle that too. So most of the warehousing transactions can be done. And as I was saying, it's real time. It'll immediately process within SyteLine, so you can see the status of these materials. They can work on a computer, on a handheld computer, tablet, or even a terminal. So they can work in each of those environments. If you talk about shop floor, which is the second module, that handles all your shop floor activities. It's used widely to record the labor time on the shop floor. So if you're doing setup transactions, run transactions on a job, you can record that. So you would clock into a job, scan into a job suffix, operation, and then you'd go choose a setup transaction, let's say, and then you go do the setup. Then once you finish, you come back, and then you can clock back in with your employee number, and then you can stop the setup, and it knows how much time you spent on it. So it can track times for setup, run. You can also do labor times for project labor transactions, SRO labor transactions. Another nice thing about shop floor is it has some advanced features, like if an employee were to clock into more than one job, sometimes they do more than one job at the same time. So it can keep track of that and allocate the time to the individual jobs once it's completed. So it can do that. And another scenario that's very, very useful is, let's say if you have a certain operation where two people work on the same thing. So it's like a team operation. Two or more people work on the same thing. So then it'll log all their time on that particular operation as a team. So it has team transactions and multi-job transaction capabilities. So that's really useful. And just like warehouse mobility, shop floor mostly works on the terminals. Mostly works on the terminals and tablets. The reason it's tailored for tablets and terminals is because the screen is full featured. It has a lot more information about the jobs. You can pull up notes on the jobs. If you have questions on how to do a certain thing, you can pull up instructions, drawings, specifications, anything tied to the job you can pull up on the shop floor. So that would not work on a handheld computer. So that's why it's more tailored towards either a tablet or a terminal. So that's where mostly they would use that. And this is also real time. So as you do the transaction, it immediately shows up on the SyteLine side. So that's the shop floor. On the time tracking is, if you want to track clock in, clock out of your employees, especially if you pay them through the clock in, clock out, then it would be useful to implement time tracking. And then there's also features like supervisors can review and approve the times, and then the times can be used for payroll processing. Okay, and it has all kinds of rules to set up overtime calculations, and it's very configurable as well. So those are the three modules within the factory track, and you can purchase one or more, and they are all independent. They can be run independently, or they can all be integrated and run together. So typically, we've seen that customers would buy warehouse mobility, few licenses of warehouse mobility for their warehouse transactions, and then they would have shop floor licenses for the shop floor users. So you can mix and match. And time tracking is an optional thing. If you want to, you could purchase it, and some of them choose to buy that too.
Okay, great. Vishnu, how would Factory Track benefit my company, and why is it different than what is just in my SyteLine ERP system?
Right. Okay, so that's a very good question. Yeah. So Factory Track, it's the screens are tailored towards the let's say the warehousing personnel or the shop floor personnel. The SyteLine screens are generally much more complicated. They ask for a lot more information, and that's sometimes it's very confusing for the shop floor people. They just need to do a few things, and those few things should be streamlined in such a way that they can scan most of the information and get that in and do the transaction. After all, we're just trying to collect their labor time or their warehousing transaction. That should take very little time compared to the actual work, right? So we don't want them to spend 2 hours a day doing transactions. So it has to be very, very lightweight and easy enough for them to do. So that's where I think Factory Track benefits. So that's a big benefit. It's easier to implement on the floor, on the shop floor, and in the warehouse for the personnel. Another big advantage is the license for Factory Track is like 1/3 of the SyteLine license. So yeah, why give them a full SyteLine license when they can use their Factory Track license to do their transactions? So yeah, so those are some of the reasons why customers would choose to use Factory Track. Another big reason is, okay, and some of the manufacturing companies we've seen, they do these transactions, especially the shop floor transactions, they collect it on paper, and it sits there until the next day somebody in the office would put it into the system. So then you don't know during the day what happened, what work was completed, what jobs were completed, or if we go shortage on materials or whatever it is, it's difficult to figure out. That does not allow the rest of the groups in the manufacturing companies like planning and purchasing and production to plan. So you need real-time information. So that's another big benefit to having Factory Track. It's integrated into your ERP system. It's real-time transaction, and allows you to plan for the rest of the activities around the production area. So yeah, those would be the benefits why Factory Track would be beneficial for any company. Yeah.
Okay. How do we prepare to implement Factory Track if we decide to use it?
Okay, yeah, Factory Track is a very configurable software. That's something, yeah, so they have many modules and 3 modules, of course, and then within the modules itself, you have many features and functions. You don't have to use all those features and functions. So you decide exactly how you want to use it, and then based on that, you would use it. So I would say, yeah, before you get started with it, you would have to have a clear understanding of how your process works right now on the warehouse side and as well as on the shop floor side. If you understand the current process, then we can design how it should be done in the future within Factory Track. So that'll help us, once you have the future process, then that'll help us configure. Usually you can configure the Factory Track so that it allows you to do those activities and not confuse your users with all the other functions. Because if you log into Factory Track, you may see like 20 different icons. You may only do like 5 things. So why even have all those things there? So you can tailor it so that it only shows you what you need to do. You can selectively prompt for some information or not prompt for some information. So you can configure this the way you want it. So understanding your current process and planning for how it should be done in the future will help you configure the Factory Track the way you want it.
Okay. Given that, how long does an implementation typically take for Factory Track?
Implementation for the Factory Track, as I was saying, yeah, you usually have to understand the current process, then you have to design the future process, and then be able to configure and do it. Typically, it takes anywhere from 3 months at the lower end, I think, to get through this, to maybe 6 months or longer, depending on all the modules you want to implement and how big of a user base you have to train and support to get through this. So yeah, it could be from 3 months to probably 6 months or somewhere in that range, yeah.
Okay. As far as the training process, is it fairly easy to train the personnel to use this? Is it pretty simple for them to understand?
It's very easy. So the way we would recommend doing this is after we design the future process and we configure the system, we usually we have to do a walkthrough so that everybody sees how it's going to work. And once the walkthrough is done, then you can do a training. You can do training on that. And the training should be followed up with step-by-step documentation. So they have that step-by-step documentation on how to do it. Typically, yeah, most of them are doing 1 or 2 transactions, and it's not all the time. It's the first week will be difficult for them because yeah, it's something new. But having the step-by-step documentation would be really helpful. And usually what we would have to do is we have to make sure that the supervisors are really trained well and they become the first line of support for the factory floor. That way when it's released to the floor, then they can support them and help them as they get comfortable. But generally it's a much simpler interface and much simpler transaction. After a week or so, they usually are fine. So the training is not such a big deal. But we have to follow that up with a step-by-step documentation, and that's what helps, yeah.
Okay. So what steps do we go through in order to implement Factory Track?
Yeah, so a typical implementation would have a couple of steps. One is the initial assessment of the current process. So here we need to understand exactly how you do your warehousing transactions and how you do your shop floor transactions. Like for example, the warehousing transactions, maybe you don't do cycle count today, so then that's not a feature you'd be interested. But maybe you'd like to do purchase order receiving. Generally, everybody starts with purchase order receiving because that's easy to implement and to build expertise on. Okay, so we have to understand exactly the transactions that you do today on the warehousing and the shop floor side, and then designing the future process. So we may look at what you have. We may want to convert that into Factory Track, but because we have Factory Track and there's other features available, we may take advantage of that to do those things as well. So we design the future process. So we have the process diagram, make sure everybody understands. Then once we have that understanding, we can then do the installation and then configuration of the software so that it's tailored to our use. That'll be followed with training. And that's your training that you do to your supervisors as well as to your regular end users, followed up with the documentation, step-by-step documentation, so they have something to look back to and do the transactions. And during the training is when we find out that, okay, there might be need for some personalizations that we have to do on some of your screens to make it simpler, hide some things that are not necessary and that sort of thing. We would personalize the screens. And then this is when we would also generate barcodes that you can scan for different transactions. Let's say if you're doing labor reporting, having barcodes for the job and the suffix and the operation is very, very useful so that you can scan that for your labor reporting. the goal is to minimize the data entry for these users. So anything you can scan, whether it's from a job paperwork or from a shelf location for the location itself, that would be where thinking about the barcoding that's necessary for this and planning for it, designing the barcodes and getting that done would be part of the personalizations and all that we do. After that's done, we would go through a pilot process where we do a day in the life of the warehousing personnel and shop floor personnel, make sure they're comfortable, everybody knows how to do it, they're trained well, and then once the pilot goes well, then we decide on a go live. So usually we would start with one transactions on the warehousing side, and then once that's up and running, then you can add other transactions and do that. Same thing on the shop floor side, we would start with one work center. Maybe that's the very first work center, and then as the job progresses from that work center to other work centers, then we bring the others online. So we can stagger in such a way that we can support each group and make sure that they're successful. And then after the go live, of course, there'll be probably a need for go live support for a week or so.
Okay, great. If we decide to implement Factory Track, how can VEITS Group help?
Yeah, so certainly VEITS Group has a lot of background in Factory Track, and we've helped many companies implement Factory Track, configure it for their purpose. So yes, so I think where we can help is we can help you first decide what modules you need to buy. I was mentioning there's 3 modules within Factory Track. So there's warehouse mobility, shop floor, and time tracking. Sometimes you may want to start with one module, then add the other. So we can help you decide what would be appropriate. Where do you start? Which module would you consider? Or would you consider all 3 or a few of them? We'll help you with purchasing that. And then once you have it, then we can plan your implementation process itself. We can help you come up with a project plan, the understanding your current process, and then designing your future process. That's all part of the planning. We can do that. And then that'll follow up with the installation, configuration, training that we would have to do, personalization, creating barcodes, reports, any specific reports, all of that. And then training, piloting, and then finally go live. One of the big benefit I think customers at least find with us is we are not just familiar with Factory Track, but we are also experts on the SyteLine side. So any questions usually would have to fall back on, okay, what has happened on the SyteLine side? We have to be able to explain that. So I think by having background in both the areas, it's really helpful rather than just understanding one piece of it. So I think that's where we can come in and we can help make the process smoother for you to implement Factory Track.
Great. Thank you, Vishnu. We appreciate you taking the time to answer our questions. If you have further questions regarding Factory Track or would like more information on VEITS Group, please visit our website at www.veitsgroup.com or call us at 1-877-834-8702. This concludes the VEITS Group podcast. We would like to wish you all a wonderful day.